basically, guys, I'm going to talk for about an hour first. This first talk is to set the context for what the TREs are. For most of us, for most physicians, for most folks who do allopathic medicine, what they do and why they work is a complete paradigm shift from what we've been taught. And yet, as you'll learn, all of mind-body healing is actually based on physiology. Nothing in mind-body healing is really, quote, in people's heads. It's all physiology. It's just a physiology that I never learned in med school. I mean, I kind of did, but mostly didn't, and I never was using it and applying it to my practice. Okay? So that's that. Now, also, before we start, I've got a little something to say, and maybe it's a confession or something, but people don't go in and become mind-body healers if you've had a perfect life. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't do that. So, in my case, I grew up, my mom was chronically ill, and I remember coming home from school every day, mom would be home sick in bed. And they didn't really have a diagnosis for her back then. I think nowadays they call it probably chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. My younger sister Leslie also had both of those things. Leslie also had a bunch of chronic pain issues, and towards the end she had horrible GI motility. Remember they gave her these little radio opaque pellets you drink, and 9 days later they were still sitting in her colon. Her gut was just shut down, okay? I myself had 25 or 30 years of really severe chronic fatigue. I would start I trained at SC, I would start a 34-hour shift, and at 10 a.m. on the first morning, not post-call, on the first morning, it took every bit of will I had to keep my eyes open to stay awake, and tremendous brain fog. So I got into this mind-body work primarily to figure out what's going on with my mom and my sister and myself. I wrote a chapter a number of years ago called Emotions, Energy, and Healing, and it was my early attempts to try and understand this stuff. Subsequently, my sister Leslie actually took her own life in 2009, and that really affected me, it devastated me actually. She was beautiful and brilliant, and I was in Houston for the funeral. A couple days after the funeral, I was at my folks' house, and the rabbi came to visit, and he said something like this. He said, in our tradition, anything that we can do to do more service or do good deeds kind of, in essence, pays off the karma of the person who just died. And Leslie sure could have used that. So I came back to LA after that, and I've been doing mind-body stuff. I've been doing it since I started. I really decided to delve into it wholeheartedly, started seeing the sickest people that I could. You guys know there's a subset of patients that are really sick, really chronically ill. Started seeing those. I mentioned to the head of my department that I wanted to do more of this work. What I didn't realize is 2 days later he went to the chiefs meeting and told all the chiefs of urology, Sen Robbins, your sickest patients, the ones that are driving you nuts, sending you 10 emails a day that you can't help. And they did. They started sending these folks to me. I didn't even know he'd said that. And I didn't know how to explain stuff then like I do now, hopefully. And somebody drive up 2 hours from San Diego, and I was the 10th guy they'd seen, and they're desperate. And my clinic would have booked them, double booked them into a 15-minute slot. So it was a really fast learning curve. It kind of overnight became the regional expert in this stuff, willingly or not. And so I spent the last 8-9 years spending most of my lunchtime and dinner time seeing these patients, and I've done it. It was my conscious choice to do it because I wanted to get good at this stuff. So that's kind of a little bit there. Okay. Again, before we start, a little clinical vignette. When I first experienced what this is talking about, it really bothered me. It bothered my understanding of physiology. So this is the deal. I had a guy in the office. He had an elevated PSA. His father had a history of prostate cancer, so his own risk was elevated. And we're doing a prostate biopsy, and towards the end, the guy tells me, Doc, I'm getting dizzy, lightheaded, nauseous. He was sweating, diaphoretic. The nurses came in and took his vital signs. Blood pressure was low, pulse rate was low. He's bradycardic. What's the diagnosis? Vasovagal? Right, vasovagal, clearly, right? Okay. The thing with vasovagal, it's kind of weird though, because the vagus nerve is actually a parasympathetic, right? It's not sympathetic. Now I would have thought, when I learned in med school, this guy's scared to be there, causing him some discomfort, I would have thought he would have had a fight or flight response, which is a sympathetic. Why was this guy having a parasympathetic response? And then what I learned in med school, I don't know about you guys, the parasympathetic is supposed to be our rest and digest system. This is a little weird, huh? It's this is kind of a weird scenario. Let's try and explain what's going on with this physiology. Okay, here's actually my intro slide. Okay. All right. 24 years ago, when I first started at South Bay, we had a speaker that came, and he told this story or metaphor that has impacted the way I practice medicine since then, so I'll share it with you. He said that one day these two guys were fishing on the side of a river. All of a sudden they hear screams coming from the river, from the water. They see this guy being swept along by the current, being buffeted by the rocks. These two guys drop their rods and reels, jump into the swim out to the guy. With some great effort, kind of managed to drag him back to the shore. They resuscitate him. They call the paramedics. Just as they're doing all that, they hear more screams. So they look back in the river, and now there's two people being dragged along by the current. And again, they rush in, great effort, manage to drag these people out of the water. They just get these people to shore. They hear more screams. There's more people in the river, okay? Finally, one of the guys decided to look upstream. He noticed that about a block upstream, there was a bridge going over the river. There was a stalled tour bus. This crazy guy was going on the bus, pulling people off, throwing them in the river. Okay? So this story, this metaphor raises the question, at what level do we deal with problems? Much of what we do in standard medicine, we deal with the problem at the level of the problem. The person has symptoms, we treat it. Very few of my colleagues, most physicians I talk to, are really, really good at that. And they're, for acute problems, that's awesome. But for a lot of our patients with chronic problems, functional problems, chronic pain, you have to start looking upstream. I call this higher level thinking. You have to jump up a few logical levels. What's happening upstream that's causing this? So I have this patient with this presenting problem. What is this an example of, or what is it a symptom of? Or you can ask, what would have to happen to cause this patient to be presenting in my office this way? If you start jumping these logical levels and looking upstream, we could maybe find better ways to help some of these difficult and challenging patients, okay? Okay, I'm gonna give you a case report. This was something that happened about 30 years ago. I was a resident. In our condo complex, there was a gal in her mid-30s who had scleroderma. As many of you may know, that's an autoimmune disease. It affects the connective tissue in the body. The skin in the hands becomes tense and taut and claw-like. It can affect the connective tissue in the esophagus, making swallowing difficult. It can affect the lungs and give a pulmonary hypertension, okay? So in this gal's case, her esophagus kept closing off, and so once a month, every month for 8 years, she was going to a GI guy. They were doing an endoscopic balloon dilation of her esophagus. So she could literally eat any regular food at all, okay, solid food. She finally got tired of that, tired of paying off her GI guy's Mercedes, or second Mercedes, okay. So she came to me to see if there were some mind-body interventions we could do. At the time I was doing hypnosis, so I brought her in for a session, and I hypnotized her, and this is what I said to her. I said, there's a feeling inside you that you don't like that has everything to do with this esophageal problem. You tried running from it, hiding from it, swallowing it away. Now we're gonna face it. As I count from 1 to 5, that feeling's gonna grow as strong as you've ever felt it. I started counting up. The count of 5, she was overtaken by this very powerful emotion. And I then said, this feeling's connected to the very first scene, situation, or event that's responsible for the emotion. As I count from 5 to 1, at the count of 1, you'll be in that situation. I counted backwards. At the count of 1, it was clear to me she was in a very traumatic situation. She was 4 years old. She was terrified. It wasn't like I'm watching myself in a video, it's happening. She was in her body, literally revivifying it. She was experiencing it. She had a deep, choking, gagging sensation in the back of her throat. I'll leave it up to your imagination what might have been happening to this 4-year-old at the time, okay? Now, at the time, I was using a hypnosis technique where I would take someone back through a memory, and each time we'd go through it, it would drain off some of the emotion and more of the emotion. And after several repetitions of that, literally all the emotions were clear from that technique. She couldn't feel them in her body. The gagging and choking sensation went away, okay? What happened after that session was pretty amazing. Her esophageal spasms resolved. In the subsequent 5 years, she did 1 additional balloon dilation. It's pretty amazing. So this first case report raises the question, was this problem in her body? Was it in her mind? Was it in both? Is there some distinction here? What's going on? It's very interesting, huh? Very interesting case report. What is going on with this gal? So there's some early principles we'll talk about, okay? When somebody has something in their life that happens that at the time feels terrifying, overwhelming, out of control. Now, first of all, most of you guys are parents here, many of your parents here, So we all know sometimes your little kid is going through something that objectively is not that big of a deal, but it seems like a big deal to the kid. Other times people really do undergo major bad stuff, okay? But something's happening at the time that seems terrifying, overwhelming. In order to literally cope with it, we a lot of times will hold those emotions and memories and lock down our musculature. It freezes to hold the emotions in our body so that memory, those emotions are not coming up to our conscious awareness and bothering us. Okay? So in this case, I was able to access that. We were able to use a technique to remove the emotional charge from the event. The muscles finally got the message, it's safe. I'm safe to let go. That's what happened with the smooth and skeletal muscle in this part of her esophagus and throat. And that took care of the problem. Okay? Now, my wife said, make sure you tell the end of the story. So 20 years later, this lady did succumb to her scleroderma. She had pretty bad pulmonary hypertension. Okay? But I think she had a much better quality of life for a lot longer as a result of that. Okay? Second case report, 28-year-old African-American female. She was in South Bay for the better part of a year in the hospital. Not every day, but more in the hospital than out. She had intractable abdominal pain. She was diabetic. She had gastroparesis. She vomited up food that was several days old, okay? They had done, as you can imagine, the $1 million workup on her, probably several of those. And so they called me one day, and the following day they were supposed to send her to Cedars-Sinai to have this experimental gastric pacemaker. They're gonna charge us $250,000. The only guarantee they gave us is that they would cash our check. There's no guarantee it's gonna help her pain or gastroparesis. So I went to go talk to this gal. I can remember the elevator doors opening to the 4th floor, and I could hear these haunting moans. Her room was like halfway down the hall. These haunting moans. I walked to her room, she was in a fetal position. She was bruxing. I hate that. Grinding their teeth together. So let me tell you what I was looking for. I was looking for some event that happened in this woman's life that at the time felt terrifying, overwhelming, something she's not been able to get over that somehow is affecting her physiology and leading to these problems. Make sense? So I talked to her, I got a history, and she did have an event like that. So basically she was age 13, her mom worked the night shift somewhere, the mom got robbed and shot. She was taken to Martin Luther King Trauma Center. They tried all night calling the girl, she's 13, or pre-adolescent and sleeping, and she kept hanging up the phone on them. And anyway, the mom passed away that night. It wasn't until the next morning that someone was able to reach this girl. They told her she had tremendous, tremendous guilt over this event. So when I have someone who has an event like this, I say, when you think about it, where do you feel the emotional charge in your body? And people usually know. She's like, in her case, right in my solar plexus. I said, how intense is it from 0 to 10? She goes, oh my God, it's like a 10 out of 10. So in this case, I used a form of emotional acupressure called EFT, the Emotional Freedom Technique. There's actually, when I was the first Western physician to endorse this. Since then, there's been a ton of studies and literature on it. It works, okay? I had her think about the memory. We tapped these acupressure points while she's thinking about it. Literally in about 20 or 30 minutes, we cleared all the emotional charge off the event. She could think about it, there's no emotional charge, no guilt, she did not have the clenching in her stomach. What I'm telling you is that we cleared the emotional charge off this memory at a deep enough level that there was a physiologic shift, and I was hoping a physical healing, okay? She went to Cedars-Sinai the next day. The gastric motility study was normal. Over the next few days, her pain was about 95% better. She went home taking maybe 3 Vicodins a month, and I had a 2-year follow-up on her, no subsequent readmissions, okay? What they taught us in med school, almost everyone in this room, sadly, is younger than me. Tell me if they taught you guys something different in med school, approximately than what I'm sharing, okay? I'm doing some generalizing, but it's still, I think, pretty accurate. I think this talk is actually probably accurate with the science and the data. I just like to simplify it. I don't like using big words, okay? All right. In med school, they would teach us something like there's an event happens, something that's stressful, you're in the woods and the bear jumps out, or you're somewhere and the mugger jumps out, and you can either move towards the threat and fight, you can flee and run away, or if something's happening to someone or like a little kid, a woman pinned down maybe during a sexual assault, and you can't fight or flee, you'll freeze. We just talked about freeze. The body there's a couple things that happen with freeze that we're going to go over, but the musculature either locks up or we just become kind of immobile and paralyzed. There's other shifts in physiology. But in med school, what they taught me is that assuming that you survive that event, you know, you get away from the bear, you get away from the mugger, your physiology is supposed to normalize. Is that approximately what you learned in med school?
I was pretty lucky because I was in San Francisco, so
Okay.
med school was a little more enlightened than my residency program, which is in North Carolina.
That's great. Okay. Let's talk about what really happens, okay? Stressful life events happen, probably to most of us. 65% of people have at least one substantial trauma, one substantial adverse childhood experience growing up. Many people have more than that, okay? As a result of dealing with what's happening at the time, our physiology can actually become programmed to run in a chronic stress mode. I'll talk a lot more about this in a minute, okay? I want to share with you a metaphor. I like metaphors because, you know, if I discuss this and that and the double-blind curve and the Kaplan-Meier and the p-value, patients forget that. If I tell them stories or metaphors, years later they'll come back to me and, hey, you told me that story, okay? This is a metaphor, and I actually find it surprisingly applicable to what we're talking about, okay? You know that Uber, Tesla, all these companies are coming up with these self-driving cars, right? So there's obviously a computer program in the car that tells it how to drive. So for example, the computer tells the car how fast you hit the gas pedal and accelerate. If you're at a red light, the light turns green, how fast you accelerate. And we'll liken that to the sympathetic nervous system, okay? You can technically program that car though, so the light turns green, the gas pedal slams down, you know, the car lays a scratch, burns rubber. You don't have to be a car mechanic to know that if the car is accelerating like that all the time, it's not good for the car, right? You don't need to be a mechanic. Do you need a double-blind university study to tell you that? No. Okay. Similarly, the computer program tells you how fast to brake. Now, if you're a third of a mile from the light and it turns red and the brakes slam on, again, that's not good for the car. We're going to liken the brake to the parasympathetic nervous system because it does. It slows things down, right? It reverses the effect of the fight or flight. Now, you could technically program the car so that you're either the car's trying to drive with both the gas and the brake on simultaneously. That would really be weird, but you could program it to do that, right? You could program the car so that you're driving and the gas and the brake pedal are just pumping like this all the time. That sounds really weird, but yet I will hope to show you that's many people, that's what their physiology is doing. There's a simultaneous sympathetic and parasympathetic charge going on. Can you imagine trying to drive to Vegas, the gas and the brake the whole way? You don't need to be a mechanic to know that's bad for the car. Now there's also these even our cars now, there's these sensors on the car, right? Warns you if someone's coming into your lane, if you're swerving out of the lane, something like that. Signals danger to the car. So you can technically set this computer program and sensitize those monitors, those sensors so much that the car is perceiving danger all the time. There could not be another car within 2 or 3 lanes from you, but the thing could be firing off danger, danger. You got to avoid this, okay? A lot of people that have early stressors, tensions, those sensors in their body, the sensors in our fear centers, the brainstem, the HPA axis, the amygdala, is so sensitized, people are reacting to stuff all the time. They're reacting to things that objectively aren't really that bad or that stressful. It's triggering a physiologic fear response. Okay? None of these problems are, quote, in people's head. It's all physiology and it's all neurology. Clear? Okay.